One reads in the newspapers that before you got married, you were a research chemist. What exactly did you do?
Well, several different things. According to the time of my life, I did it. At the end of my time at university, one tried to help working out the structure of things like the simple proteins by the use of X-rays. Then I went into industrial chemistry and did a certain amount of work on plastics, which has been extremely valuable ever since, and also an amount of fundamental research on the chemistry of surfaces, because you can see, obviously, that the structure of something at the surface is probably different from the structure in the bulk of a liquid, and many reactions in the body, for example, must take place at surfaces. So you try to work out the molecular structure of what actually goes on at the surface and how that differs from what goes on in the bulk of a liquid.
When you were Secretary of State for Education and Science, did you enjoy the scientific bit of it particularly?
I enjoyed it very much. I think perhaps I enjoyed that work more than anything else in the department, because we had charge of the fundamental research and finding the money for it. And really the great thing was to try to leave as much as possible to the scientists themselves. They really knew where we could make tremendous advances in the sciences. It's no earthly use saying, look, let's allocate a lot of money to this or that particular subject, unless you really are on the verge of a breakthrough there and have the people to do that kind of work. So they really had to weigh up what piece of research should take precedence over the other. I think there was something else too, which isn't normally realized. Many people in life and in politics say, well, you ought to concentrate on short-term problems to get a fairly fast solution. But you never know where the solutions are going to come from. You can do a fundamental piece of research which might not have any obvious use for quite some time, but then all of a sudden it does. And you must keep the fundamental research going if you're to find tomorrow's solutions.
Have you ever followed up any of the fundamental research you did years ago as a chemist? Do you know what happened to it?
Well, no, I haven't. I do know that one of the proteins we were working on took a very long time to yield to analysis, although it was one of the simpler ones. It took about 19 or 20 years. So in that sense, I did follow it up. One of the people I was working with went to the Weizmann Institute in Israel, and I sometimes go back to Oxford from time to time to see what is going on, and I'm always making inquiries about what's happening in the sphere.
Totally apart from being a senior politician, you must be a pretty rare person in being both a trained scientist and a barrister. How did you come to make that transition?
Dear, I don't think I like being called a senior politician. It makes one sound so very old.
Not elderly, just senior.
It was really rather interesting how I came to follow that path. It shows, I think, the influence of people in your life as distinct from subjects. I had a very good chemistry teacher at school. And I think, often at school you tend to follow a subject if you get on very well with a teacher. That was certainly so in my case. And so I was well set on the path to reading the sciences at university. I'd gone on to that side in the sixth form. Then my father from time to time used to go, and when he was mayor, sit on the magistrate's bench locally. And I used to go along with him. My father and I talked a lot together. I sometimes wonder if this generation talks enough from parents to children. My fear is that you talk in horizontal age groups and not across generations, but we used to talk a lot. And I would go along with him and sit in court, and then have lunch during the break. And at quarter sessions there was a recorder there who's now dead, who was quite a well-known silk at the time. And I used to talk to him at lunch and say that I was getting extremely interested in the law from having sat in court and listened. But I was really embarked on the scientific path, and I didn't see how I could possibly change. And he said, well, don't change. I read physics at Cambridge back at the beginning of this century, 1902, 1903, before, incidentally, we knew that you could split atoms or that you had an internal structure to atoms. I read physics, and then I went on and took up law. And if you want to do both, you'll find that the patent bar requires both a scientific and a legal qualification. So I followed that path, but by the time I got both qualifications, I was really very keenly interested in the financial side of politics, and so went to the revenue side of law more than patent. But that's how it came about. And I sometimes wonder if I've seen that my children have enough contacts with senior citizens, with people who have reached the top of the tree in different professions, and had the chance to talk as much to them as I had.
And yet, of course, your children are better placed to do this, presumably by far than you were.
Yes, but you see, I was brought up in a smaller town where one valued these opportunities. You know, if you're brought up in London, the opportunities seem more frequent, and when they're more frequent, you don't value them as much, or perhaps take enough chance to use them when they come along.
You mentioned your talking to your own children. You mentioned talking to your father. Did you talk to your mother very much?
Not so much, except about very practical things. She was very much the Martha rather than the Mary. She was absolutely marvellous. She ran the home supremely well. She was a very clever needlewoman, and I inherited a certain amount of that from her. And she took an interest, but she didn't take part in discussions very actively. She was also keenly interested in music.
You said something a moment ago that implied that you went into the bar, at least partly, because you were already interested in politics, and that you specialised on the financial side because you were interested in that aspect of politics. Did you decide to become a politician very early on?
Very early on, certainly at university. I joined the various political clubs, enjoyed them, was able to take a very active part. And university gives you so much more than work. It gives you the opportunity to meet a lot of people with whom you have interests in common. And I clearly was fascinated by the subject by the time I left university, and spent a lot of my spare time after I left university being involved in politics.
Why?
Why? I wonder why someone wants to go on the stage, or wants to take up music, or wants to take up art. Taking up politics, if you have a fascination for it, is of that same quality. You don't know why you're interested in something, but you know you are. With me, it wasn't an acquired taste. It seemed to be quite fundamental.
From what sort of age? One does meet small children sometimes, 7 or 8, who are fascinated by it.
I was quite used to debating almost any subject at school. Again, my father was a good speaker. It goes back to this. We always discussed things at home, but then I think it was a fascinating period and a very important period. But that might have been one's sensitivity to it at the time rather more than the period. It was the time of the rise of Nazi Germany, when one was not knowing. I was small at the time, but I knew the debates and arguments that were going on. The rise of Nazi Germany, when one was undecided whether Hitler was doing a superb job of organisation or a terrifying job of tyranny.
Or both.
Or both. And one didn't know how to adjudge some of the reports that were coming out. And then, of course, things started to step up. And then a curious thing happened. My sister had a correspondent at school. You know, we used to have correspondents in European countries to try to improve your languages.
Pen friends.
Pen friends, yes. And all of a sudden we got a letter from her pen friend in Austria. Please, could we help to get her out? Because she was a Jewess. Now, this was 1937, 38. And she came out and came to our hometown, and the Rotary Club looked after her. But you see, we learned at first hand what was going on. But always my father was a great reader. I went every Saturday morning to our local library to get the 2 latest books, usually one on either politics or biography, and perhaps the latest novel. And these were read by the family and talked about.
Do you enjoy the company of lawyers going back to the law?
Oh, yes, tremendously. Tremendously, still do. And when I go back to the inns or talk to lawyers, I just feel a tremendous feeling of pleasure and fundamental interest. I still feel quite a yen for it. I like the law very much, not only as a forensic subject, not only from the viewpoint of the court work, but for its importance in a free democracy. I think people in this country would have called themselves free men long before we had one man, one vote. And that was because of the early importance of getting equality before the law and of making certain that the person had a right to equity before the courts. Of course, in some ways, comparatively late in our history, but a good deal earlier than other countries. And I don't think it's generally realised how much freedom and democracy owes to the rule of law. And I sometimes wonder now if that is one of the things which is changing.
Apart from politics, what in the last few weeks or months has given you the most pleasure?
Last few weeks and months? Well, there hasn't been much time in the last few weeks and months since the election to do very much other than politics. I do like to collect one or two little bits of porcelain, Coalport, Derby or Worcester, but you know now they're so terribly expensive. Gone are the days when you could pop into a little antique shop and get something for, well, certainly not a few shillings, but even for a few pounds. People have begun to realise the value of our artistic heritage, and they're snapping things up, some for investments. I like them for the sheer beauty of the things, and I wish that I had more, but that's one of the things, and therefore I read about them whenever I can as well. I also like one or two of the Chinese pictures. They're very much cheaper than English pictures, but alas, the Americans now are coming in to buy them. Now, China is respectable from the viewpoint of America, so they're going up. But I find I take a very much greater interest now in art, in all forms of national heritage and conservation.
When you say art, you mean the visual arts?
The visual
arts.
The visual arts. I used to, as a young person, not be at all interested in sculpture. I think perhaps this was because one wasn't taught to understand it. You do need an understanding. You need to be taught about things to get the maximum appreciation.
Have you been taught in this way at all?
I think I was only taught by being taken round by competent guides, and then one realised what there was and started slowly to read up more and more about it. And then, of course, there have been some television series which have opened one's eyes to beauties that would otherwise been unknown. I think Kenneth Clarke's series on civilization and the book he wrote is absolutely magnificent. Apart
from Kenneth Clarke, what do you watch on television, if anything?
I think there are one or two late-night things sometimes on BBC Two. There was a programme on icons the other evening, but that's only if I'm back and just wanting to sit and relax after the House of Commons, just before one goes to bed. Otherwise, I think it's the odd Saturday evening viewing. Of course, we all watch Mike Yarwood. I mean, he's so very good. I adore Morecambe and Wise. These kind of things, but I would go for watching the omnibus programme. It used to be called Monitor years back, and Hugh Weldon used to do it. I think it's never been done better than then. Anything which Andre Previn is on, the 10 o'clock Sunday night, the Monitor omnibus programmes, we usually try to watch.
Do you find it easy to relax? Some politicians are such active people, so busy, that they really do find it very hard to sit still at all.
I would find it acutely difficult if all of a sudden I had 10 days to a fortnight off without something specific to do at the end of it, because my whole life has been geared to having too much to do in the time. But I think I'd probably have the sort of mentality where I would give myself something to do. I would make a point of going round the galleries or going to some of the musical concerts which I haven't been able to get to, or doing some reading which I haven't been able to do. But I should be at a loss, because I've always had to do things with an object in view.
What do you wear to relax in? You live in a neighbourhood simply filled with shops selling jeans in vast quantities. Have you ever been seen in blue jeans?
No, I very rarely wear trousers at all. I remember having to get a couple of trouser suits when I went to India about 18 months ago, and I didn't like myself in them at all, because I thought they should only be for very slim ladies, and they said at the shop if that's all we sold to, we should have a very poor trade. But the family said it looked all right. What does one wear to relax? You come back at the end of the day, and I think people think that you have time to slip in something rather beautifully silky and soft. You just don't. You flop down in whatever you're wearing. And at weekends, it is one just... I've always worn a skirt in preference to trousers, and just any easy top.
What do you do at weekends?
I like long skirts. I do like long skirts in winter. There is something about wearing a long skirt which feels a little bit more feminine.
When you have a weekend free and don't have a large number of speaking engagements, how do you spend it? In London?
No, we tend to go down to Kent on the odd occasion when we have a weekend free. It occurs about once in 4, once in 5 weekends, or we have a small flat there. Usually, one reads, because it is nice just to sit back and read. Sometimes political reading, sometimes it's general reading. Or if you're wanting to empty your mind of problems, I do read the latest detective story, which is a marvellous way of relaxing. But usually there's something to be done. You see, this is one of the differences between men politicians and women. When I have time off, I have to look around the house and think, well, I must get that done and that done and that done. Or it may be a pile of mending. Or it may be going through the linen cupboard and seeing what wants repairing. Or it may be, I think last time I had a weekend off, I think I redecorated the room we're now talking in. Not terribly well, but I mean it's a lot cleaner with emulsion paint than it was before. And I think I did the breakfast room another weekend and the bathroom wants doing sometime when Parliament's in recess. There are always these kind of things to be done, because if you have someone in to do it, the cost is enormous out of net taxed income. And so I also take great pleasure in doing it. Sometimes I have to sit in front of an enormous sheet of paper trying to write something, and the inspiration won't come. Now, at the beginning of the day, if I'm doing interior decorating, there's the room in a terrible mess. And at the end of the day or the day after, I can see what I've done. I can see where the effort has gone.
You use the writing analogy. Do you write very much?
No, I'm usually writing to write specific papers about specific things. Or, you know, the trouble with politicians is we have to speak more often than we have something to say. And by the time you've been speaking 2, 3, 4 or 5 times a week while Parliament's sitting, not always in the House, but to the many organisations you have to speak to, you feel a bit stale. Now that's why I always keep some reading going, and I always, among other things, I always read some poetry, because the poet has learned to say, to put his ideas into very economical and often very beautiful language. And I find that sometimes if I read some poetry, that will set you off on a theme. And you must try to find in politics a different approach. There's not much new to say in politics. There hasn't been for years. But it's the approach that's individual and different. Now, just let me, there are 2 themes that I've just been using and must find some more. William Butler Yeats wrote 50 years ago, let me just think, can I remember it? The centre cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The best lack all conviction, the worst are full of passionate intensity. The last 2 lines, the best lack all conviction, the worst are full of passionate intensity. Now you can see its application to a whole number of things. But one couldn't have thought up that sort of economy of language. So you draw on someone else's. Just another one of Kipling's that I will use sometime. Truth is seldom friend in any crowd. This, of course, is obviously the tactic of the demagogue. The presentation rather than the real underlying facts. And you can see the relevance of that to the present situation. So one is constantly out of your knowledge, out of your views, trying to find a different approach, because a good speech must have a theme. It must not be now and there's point 1 and then there's point 2 and then there's point 3. And sometimes the ideas just won't come. So then I just down tools and start to do some reading.
Well, what do you read apart from poetry? You said political reading.
Well, there are always a number of biographies to read. Other people's experience. Often you'll find will have an echo in the present. I was just reading George III by John Brooks about the politics of that period. You'll be surprised how many parallels there are with the present, how some of the politicians then had to throw over some of their cherished beliefs because of the realities of the present situation. How then they had to try to find a kind of modus vivendi, something that would work between 2 views when it would seem as if there wasn't a way through. But you see, you often have to try to find a way through when there is no apparent way through. So there's all the biographical, there's the whole period now reading back all the troubles with Ireland, the life of Carson, etc. This is why I say there's not a lot new in politics, but there's always just that little bit different. I was always interested in reading about the American scene. I think John Kennedy often got his ideas by getting a lot of people in front of him and getting the clash of ideas and discussion coming out of that. And I think I've probably, particularly when I was a minister, worked very much in that way. Not always a calm life for one's staff, but I hope always an interesting one.
Do you listen to music at all?
I do listen to it, but nowadays only on the radio or on television. I no longer have a piano to play because I never had time to practice and got so horrified with my own playing that I couldn't carry on. But it's one of the things I would like to have more time to do, because when we do listen to a really good orchestra playing some of the classics, it's absolutely wonderful. It's a different world. You're translated into a different world, and it is a complete relaxation. It involves the emotions in a totally different way, and I think puts them onto a higher plane.
Do you go to concerts at the opera very much?
We go to the opera whenever we can, which isn't very often. It's also very expensive now. Concerts only once or twice. If we happen to be in London on a Sunday evening, one can go up to the Albert Hall.
Which is not very far away.
Which is not very far away.
You mentioned visiting India a few moments ago. Do you like travelling? Is it something you do a lot of?
Yes, I love travelling, and I was very fascinated with India. Much more so than I expected to be. It was a completely different experience from any I'd had before. I liked the people tremendously. Of course, I was very lucky in the people I met. I met a lot of people in politics there, and we had so much in common. We share the same history. But also, I was fascinated with some of their wonderful architecture. You know, I just feel that modern architects haven't lived up to what we should have expected from them. But when you go back and see some of the monuments which previous architects have built, they had, tremendous imaginations, creativeness, I think, of to a level we haven't got, but also they had the craftsmen available. I went in India, obviously, to see the Taj Mahal, expecting it to be rather trite, having seen so many photographs of it. But it isn't. It is one of the most elegant, beautiful, exquisite things you can ever see. And then you go to a town not far away, Fatehpur Sikri, which was built in 16 years in tremendous, bold, savage style, with a great deal of carving. The whole town was built, lived in, and abandoned because the water failed in about 16 to 20 years. Good heavens, it would take us 5 years or so to get one brick on top of another. And I feel that we're not now, in architecture, producing something as beautiful for the next generation as we have inherited from the past.
Where do you go by preference for your holidays?
We haven't taken many holidays recently. We used to go skiing when the children were younger. When I was a minister, I only took one overseas holiday. We went to Corsica because I hadn't been there. The scenery is very beautiful. Last year, just for 10 days. But now, with things a little uncertain, we shall just go into the English countryside, which too is very lovely. It'll be just marvellous to sit and relax.
You have a daughter. Would you like her to follow your footsteps into politics?
If she wants to. She doesn't want to very much at the moment, although I think she'd be very good. She takes a tremendous interest, the same sort of interest that I took, in what is going on in the world. But it was, of course, very difficult for her when she was at university, when I was Minister of Education. Likewise, my son was at college during that time. And she didn't have any too easy a time. But she shows no wish to come into politics. I think she sees, of course, how very hard we work. Not that she's afraid of hard work. But you really have got to have this fascination, I think. Not just think, I will go into politics in the same way as you think, well, I will go take up another trade or profession. You want to have a fascination for it.
You were conscious as a child of the advantages of being able to talk across the generation boundary to your father and to the barrister and so on. What do you talk to your own children about?
They do talk about what has gone on in the world. We do discuss what's the news in the newspapers and the news as it comes over. In this house, if we're in, whenever there is a news on the radio or television, we listen, obviously we have to. And we do talk about it. And I do find that both my children tend to get on very well with people a lot older than themselves.
They being how old?
They're 21.
Grown up, in other words.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And living away from home for the most part?
No, they're still both living at home. I was a very good advertisement for what I was preaching when I had my daughter was a student at university but living at home.
Do you look forward to being a grandmother?
Oh, goodness me, they're not married yet. I hope they won't get married too young. No, it is not anything I've contemplated. It's too far away. I don't really, because I think that grandmas are called on to do a lot of babysitting, and I don't think I'm going to have time to babysit.
How jealous is your husband of your time? I take it he must complain, doesn't he, from time to time?
No, he doesn't complain very much. He thinks I do a fantastic amount of work, which indeed I do. And it is such heaven when we are at home as a family all together, and it doesn't happen that often. Always at the end of the day we are. We always come into the sitting room at the end of the day and say what's happened in the day, and each share one another's experiences. And it is valuable to have something to put into the ring, as it were. This is what I've done, what have you done? But it's often quite late at night, so we tend to be late going to bed. He keeps his complaints very much to himself, but I know that he feels that we all work rather hard and don't have very much of a social life.
How does one stay healthy in politics? Because so many politicians clearly eat rather too much, probably drink a little bit too much. It's not a life conducive to being in good physical condition, I would have thought.
Oh, yeah, you're quite right. It would be very, very easy to put on quite a bit of weight, and from time to time in the recess you have to make an effort to get it down. If you're very busy, it's not that difficult to keep it down because your hours are long. I would normally leave about 9:30. Recently I haven't been home until about midnight on one thing or another, 11:30, midnight. And you know what the House of Commons is like. It's full of long, long corridors. If you've got 8 or 9 meetings a day from one room to another, you really are dashing around quite a bit. But you're quite right, you have to watch. And it's just the same advice you'd give to any housewife. Don't eat in between meals. You're all right if you have 3 decent meals a day. But don't eat or drink too much in between. And that, I think, is where life in the house can be a bit difficult, because you do need the cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a drink. Or if you're there very late at night, you'll find by about 2 o'clock in the morning again, you're hungry. And that could put in an extra meal in a day, which is very bad.
Do you like cooking yourself?
Yes, I like cooking. Again, I don't do as much of it as I used to, because I used to like cooking different things. But alas, now I'm afraid it's very plain cooking we do. We tend to do the grilling and the roasting at weekends because it's quick. Also, you know, the things that you spend hours on, the sauces, some of the sweets and desserts, are terribly fattening.
Suppose that you were suddenly to be expelled from politics. For some reason your political career came to an end. What would you really most like to do? Would you go back to the bar?
Well, I think the first thing I'd try to do is to get back into politics, because this has become a way of life. And the thought of passing the Palace of Westminster, the House of Commons, and not being able to walk in there, really I find rather horrific. So the first thing I would do would be to try to get back in. But otherwise I should gravitate very much towards the law. Don't know that I would go back to the bar. It's difficult to start again, but I might.